Alright, so in the previous video, we set up authentication in our tic-tac-toe game. So in this video, we're going to set up the actual game logic. So before we get to programming, let's run these commands. Open up the Pocketbase folder and cd Pocketbase and run /Pocketbase serve. Create a new terminal and run npm run dev. And once you have those two commands running simultaneously, close the terminal. Then in the routes folder, let's create a new folder called game. And in this folder, create a new file called plus layout.server.ts. Then we're going to export const load is equal to async locales. And now we're going to say this satisfies layout server load from $types. And we're going to say if the locales dot pocketbase dot auth store. So basically, if the user is not logged in, so is valid. So if it's not valid, we throw redirect of 303 to make sure it's permanent to /sign up. So to the sign up page. We'll test this out after we get the game logic done. So then by default, we'll just return an empty object. So then let's create a new folder in the game folder called G. Then we create another folder inside of this one called create. And in this folder, we create a new file called plus page.server.ts. And then we say export const load is equal to async. And we return game ID UID. So then by default, the UID function does not exist. So let's import v4 as UID from the UUID package. So now let's make sure this satisfies layout server load from /types. No, this is page server load. So then let's export const actions is equal to an object that contains a default function that's an asynchronous function that takes in two parameters, the locales object and the request object. And now we get the auth model, locales.pocketbase.auth model, the auth store dot model. And we say if the auth model is null or undefined, we return. But if the auth model exists, we get the form data from the request. So form data is equal to await request.form data. And then we get the game ID from the form data. Form data dot game dot get game ID. Then let's create a try catch block. And then we say if the type of game ID does not equal to string, we throw a new error saying that invalid game ID. So now let's create a game object, const game, which is of type game that we created in the lib folder. So we say the game ID, automatically, once we create it, the game is already active. And then we say the current player by default is X always, because that's the rule of tic-tac-toe. Then let's create a new game, which is going to be a new array of 3 objects and then we fill each of the instances of the array, each of the 3 instances, with 3 more. And then we fill each of those with an empty string. So now let's say that the player X is auth model ID. So now let's get the games collection. The games collection is equal to locales dot pocketbase dot collection games. And now let's set it. So let's create a new game. Let's say await games collection dot create game. And on the error, so if there is an error, we say if the error is an instance of error of the error class, we say return error is equal to error dot message, and we just give back the game ID. And also we say return error, unknown error occurred when creating game, and we just specify the game ID. And when everything is successful and there's no errors, we just throw a redirect 303 to /g/game ID. So by default, this creates a game and we send them to a link that opens up the game for them. So now let's close this file. And in the same create folder, we create a new file called +page.svelte. So now let's close this. And let's create a script tag with the language setting set to TS, which is TypeScript. And I'll say export let data is equal to page data. And export let form is equal to action data. So then let's create a H1, say create a new game, form post. And by default, we don't need to give an action because we have the default action already set to the same URL. And let's create one input. That's going to be a text. The name is going to be game ID. Placeholder is create a custom ID. And for the value, we say form.game ID. And if the form game ID does not exist, we just give a data.game ID. And now let's create a submit button. Send a button, submit, and let's say create game. So now if there is an error, so s if block form dot error. So if the error exists, we show a paragraph that displays the error. So form dot error. So let's close this. And in the G folder, let's create a new folder that's named bracket game underscore ID and another closing bracket. So now in this one, we create a new file called page.server.ts. So now I say export const load is going to be an async function. And then we get the locales. We also get the params. And let's say this satisfies page server load. Now let's import the auth model from the locales is equal to locales.pocketbase.auth_store.model. And now we say if the auth model does not exist, we throw redirect of the code 303 to /. Now let's do a try catch block. Let's get the games collection. So games collection is equal to locales.pocketbase.games.collection games, and then we let result is equal to is of type game and record model. Let's import the game type and the record model type. And let's say await games collection dot get first get first item, get first list item. And for the query, we're gonna say game underscore ID is equal to quotations. Make sure to set the quotations, and inside these quotations we say params.game ID. So let's make sure to take off the white space on this template string, and now we say const player is x, result.player x is equal to authModel.id, const player is O, and it's going to be result.player O, and if the player O exists, that it equals to the authModel.id. So now we check if the player O is empty. Empty is equal to not result.player O. So now we say if not player is O and player O is empty. Actually, let's set this to the player X. So if the player is not X and if the player O is empty, we set them to player O. So we say const await game collection dot update. So this is gonna be a game and record model. So I'm gonna say result.id dot result player O is equal to auth model, the ID of the auth model. So once we set it and once we actually update it, we're going to say if player is O or player is X or player O is empty, player O empty, we return result player ID is auth model of ID. So if the user fits in one of these criterias, then we return them and we let them in. But if not, we throw a new game not available error that we created in the first video, actually in the second video. So now let's get this. If the error is an instance of game not available error, we redirect them 303 to not just the slash, but we're also going to redirect them to error game not found. But by default, we're just going to throw redirect 303 to slash. So let's close this file. Now let's make sure to change this name to auth model, not modal. And now let's create a new file inside the game ID folder called pluspage.svelte. And this is going to be script lang set to ts. We're going to export let data, page data, let game, so you go to data.result. Now we're going to set 3 variables. We're going to set a toast message variable is of type string or undefined. Let's copy this down. Toast ID, and this is going to be false, loaded. Now let's set a reactive statement saying that if the toast message does not equal to null, then toast ID is equal to UUID. But by default, the UUID function doesn't exist. So let's import it. So we import v4 as UUID from UUID. And then we let local toast ID is equal to toast ID. Then we set timeout. So we say if toast ID is equal to local toast ID, local toast ID, then we say toast message is equal to nothing, to undefined. And then there's going to be a timeout of 3 seconds, so 300, because it's by the milliseconds. Else, if the toast message is undefined, we say toast ID is equal to undefined as well. So now let's set the onMount function. So by default, when the component is mounted on the browser, we set a timeout, loaded is equal to true. That's going to be a 200 millisecond delay. So we say if the PB store doesn't exist, let's import PB. Let's make sure to give the $sign in front to make sure it is listening. If the PB store doesn't exist, we return. So now we say unsubscribe is equal to await $PB dot collection games dot subscribe. And by default, this is going to be a game and a record model. So let's import both of these types. Let's give it a data dot result dot ID result. Let's let this expand. So we say if result dot action is equal to delete return. If result dot record dot ID does not equal to data dot result dot ID, we return. And now we say game is equal to result dot record. So every time we get a change from the server that our game has changed, we set it to the game. This right here. Now let's say let unsubscribe is going to be an unsubscribe func or undefined. So now I say when the component gets destroyed, so on destroy, be async function. If unsubscribe function, we say await unsubscribe. And let's create an async function called handle cell submit. So every time we click a cell, we say we get the row index, which is going to be a number, and an item index, which is also going to be a number. We're going to create a try catch block. Now let's say let local game is equal to game.game. Let's make a fetch request. Const fetch. We're going to await a fetch call to g, so /g/ page.params. Now we're going to say $page.params. Let's import the page store. Dot game ID / we set the row index / and then we set the list index, the item index. And now we also set the method to post. Now we say if the game.game is equal to local game and game is active, we send a toast message saying that it's not your turn. So now we don't catch anything with the error. We just make sure that the whole application doesn't break. So we send an async function called handle copy link. We await navigator dot clipboard dot write text at page dot url dot href, and we set a toast message saying that the link copied to clipboard. So now let's create an if block as if else block game dot player o. So if the game dot player o exists, we actually initiate the game, but if not, we create a header tag h1 saying that we're waiting for player o, and the button on click we send handle copy link, and the button for the content we're going to say copy link for game. But right now let's test it out. Let's go to the /g page, /g /create. It sends us to the sign up page. So now that that works, we can be sure that all of the users that are going to be on this page are actually authenticated. So let's create a game container, and then inside this let's create a game grid, and as each block game.game. This is known as row, and then row index, and then we create another as each block. So each row, we're going to loop over each row and get the item. We're also going to get item index. We're going to create a form post that just has one button inside, and the action is going to be to /g at page dot params dot game underscore id slash row index slash item index. This is going to be a method post. Let's make sure to set this to actually the item index, the row index, my bad. And we're going to say on submit. We're going to say this handle cell submit row index, and we're going to say item index. So this is basically going to be like a mini form enhancement. So there's going to be basically progressive enhancement, but without the form action. So on the button, we just say the item, and the disabled property is going to be set to if item does not equal, it's an empty string. So let's expand this. And now let's set up the actual result modal. So let's create a if block, not game.active, and loaded. So this is going to display the result of the game. Either you lost, you won, or if it ended up in a draw. Container. This is going to be transition fade. So we're going to import the fade, and we're just going to say that the duration is equal to 100. And inside this, we're going to create a result modal div. that's also going to have a transition of fly. Let's import the fly transition. Y is equal to 100, and the duration is set to 300 milliseconds. Oh wait, let's set it to colon. Set this to loaded. Let's create a as if block, as if else block actually, and if the game.winner is true, we say h1 player game.winner dot to uppercase wins with the exclamation point. So we say h1 draw. Then we create an anchor tag /g/create a new game. So now that the result model has been created, we create the toast message. So we say as if block. So if the toast message exists, dot toast container, then we create a button with a class of toast message with the transition property set to fly, the fly transition, y set to 100, and we say on click toast message is equal to undefined. Then this displays the toast message. Let's expand this. So now for the style, there's so much styles in this class that we're not going to actually be able to get into each line by line. So in the link in the description, I'll link you to the GitHub. Go over to routes, game, G, game ID, plus page.svelte. Copy this. And we're just going to paste it below. So by default on this on submit, we just say prevent default because we don't want it to actually refresh the page every time we submit. So let's close this file. And in the row index, and let's create a new folder called row bracket row underscore index. And inside of this folder, we create a new folder called item underscore index. And inside of that folder, we create a plus server.ts. Now we get a function called getDraw with the board set to board. False. For let move of row. So right now we're just looping over the board and the rows to get each item specifically. So if the move is equal to nothing, we set break loop to true. We set this to break loop. Move. And if break loop break, and if break loop break. Now we say all moves made is equal to false, and let's change this G for D. And by default, we're going to say all moves made is equal to true. So we just loop over every single item in the array, and if we find that one of them is actually an empty string, we say that all moves made is false. But if all of the items are not empty arrays, then all the moves have been made. Return all moves made. So now right here, we're going to get a get winner function, which is going to be a nasty function. It's going to be humongous. So current player or O. Let's just get to this function when we need to get to this function because it's its own beast. So let's export const post. So we're going to get a post request handler is equal to async. So we get the auth model from the Pocketbase, the auth store dot model. If the auth model does not exist, we throw a redirect 303 to say that it's permanent to slash. Let valid is equal to false. Create a try catch block. Error. Const games collection locales dot pocket base dot collection dot games. So now we fetch the current game. So we say the result is going to be of type game and the record model. Let me await games collection dot get first list item, and then the query is going to be game underscore ID is equal to, remember, always put the quotations whenever you're querying in Pocketbase. So now we say params dot game underscore ID. Make sure to import these types. Now we say const player is x is equal to result dot player x is equal to auth model ID. So we also say players O, result dot player O. And so if the player O exists and if the user is player O, if neither of these are true, so if the player is not X and if the player is not O, player is X or player is O, we throw new game not available error. Then we say valid is equal to true. Then we say if not result dot player O, we throw new error, just an empty error. Let's create another one of these. Not player not result dot active. So if the game is not active, we can't actually make a move. So now we say const row index is equal to parse int params dot row index const row index greater than. So we're just making sure that the row index is less than 4 and also greater than 0. So it's actually between 0 and 2. So it is either 0, 1, or 2. Let's set this to 2. We say less than. So if the row index greater than or not row index less than, so if it's not inside these bounds, we throw a new error. And then we say const item index is equal to parse int params dot item index. And then we do the same validation for the item index. Let's rename all of this right here to just say item index. So we say also item. And then we also say if result.game row index and item index is not equal to an empty string. So if it's already taken, we throw a new error. So right now we're just validating that all the circumstances are correct so that we can actually make a move. So if player is X and result.current player is X, then we also create an else if and player is O. So right here, these are really similar, but they differentiate in the exact player that we are. Result.game, row index, item index is equal to X. Result.winner is equal to get winner. Result.game and result.current player. Let's say this is result. Now we say if the result.winner is undefined, we say result.active is equal to not get draw result.game. Else result.active is equal to false. So now we say if result.active result.current player is equal to the opposite player, which is O, and then we just await games collection dot update, which can be a game and record model result dot ID and then result. Let's make sure this is record model. So right here we're gonna copy this down, and instead of X, every time X appears we just say O. So then every time O appears we switch it for X as well. So now we say so now we catch an error. So if error instance of game not available error, we throw redirect 303 slash error game not available. Now we say if the game is valid, we throw redirect and back to the same game page. So 303 slash G slash, wait, let's say this is that params dot game ID. And if it's not, we throw a redirect of 303 to slash. So now let's go over to GitHub, and funnily enough, let's go over to the server page and copy down the get winner function, because this is way too hard of a function for me to explain to you while I'm typing. So I'll just paste it into here, and then I'll explain it to you. So right here, we determine if the horizontal win is valid. So if the winner has won horizontally, so now we say if the winner has not won horizontally, we decide whether the user has won diagonally either way. So either diagonally from right to left or left to right. So now we say vertical win. So there's 3 possible vertical wins. We just say it like this. The vertical win is not as simple as the horizontal win. Just know that this works. Just know that this works. So let's close this. Let's open up this. Let's create a new account. Let's actually log in, because in the previous episode I created an account. So let's say at email.com. But let's actually sign up then. So let's create a new game. Create game. What happened? Let's see what happened. Oh, Let's take that out. Let's make sure to say this is container. Let's copy link and so now let's sign up and let's create a new account called test1 at email.com, and then we create a dummy password. So now let's paste this in, paste the link. So now if I do an O move, but you see that I can't make another move. If I go to X right here, O, and then X, you see player X wins. It's that simple. We could restart and see the modal still pops up. Thank you for watching. I hope this video served you some value. Let me know in the comment section down below if you like this form of content, and also like and subscribe.